Welcome to the Geekly. My name is Jules.
I'm Lex.
Today we're talking about SnowPiercer, we're talking about Justice League Doom, and we're talking about episode 1 of Tales from the Loop. But first, very exciting, we have a brand new patron. I'd like to say welcome to Carla. Thank you so much for being our patron. We really hope you enjoy all the bonus content on Patreon. We're going to send you a t-shirt, badges, lots of lovely things. So yeah, we really appreciate you, and thanks for listening.
We love our patrons. They're like literally our favorite people. And we talk to them all the time. So if you want to actually have conversations with us, be a patron. We're doing a giveaway right now to get up our YouTube subscriptions and also for new patrons. Basically, all you have to do is subscribe to our YouTube channel. That gets you one entry, or become a patron. Doesn't matter which tier you pick. You can pick the $1 one, gets you 3 entries. We had one person who did both, so she has 4 entries. You can win either a Birds of Prey Harley Quinn Funko Pop, a Batman, Captain Marvel, or the time travel suit of Black Widow. I mean, not the suit, but the Funko Pop of her in the time travel suit.
We also released a bit of bonus content on Monday called Versus, episode 1, where we compared Space Force and Upload. And yeah, we talked about it for basically an hour, comparing all aspects of the two shows. Won't give it away who won, but it was a very convincing victory for the winner. So yeah, I actually really enjoyed doing that. So go and listen to that. It was good fun.
Yeah, it was loads of fun, and we've gotten a lot of positive feedback, so people are enjoying it. So it's definitely something you should check out.
Before we start, Lex, did you know that the Joker has a new girlfriend in the comics?
I did. Her name is Punchline, which is like the worst name. Oh my god. Like, can they just get away from the Joker thing? Like, Harley Quinn was kind of cute and funny, and it wasn't, too jokery, but I feel like Punchline is just like, she's not gonna have her own identity. She's just gonna be Joker's girlfriend. I could believe the story between him and Harley because it started out as like a psychiatrist patient thing, and he kind of manipulated her into it. And I can imagine that, like, while he was sort of playing with her, he did get a little bit fond of her. And I think, like, in Suicide Squad with Jared Leto and Margot Robbie, you kind of see that where he, like, dares her to jump into the thing and he's gonna walk away, but then he's kind of like, oh fuck, I've got to get her out. But that to me seemed like it was sort of a fluke occurrence for him, that he didn't really go looking for a girlfriend. He just kind of ended up caring about this person. Not that, like, I'm one of those people who romanticizes the relationship. I find it interesting, but Joker is a psychopath.
Okay, let's move on to Justice League Doom. I'll get the things I like out the way first, because there were things that I liked, and then we'll maybe delve into why it ultimately fails. Justice League Doom is based on a graphic novel called The Tower of Babel, and The Tower of Babel is a very, very good graphic novel. The idea that Batman would take it upon himself to create silver bullet ways of taking out the rest of the Justice League. It's the most Batman plot, I think, of any graphic novel I've ever read. He comes up with all these methods, locks them on the Bat computer. The arrogance of the man saying it'll never get, my Batcave will never be breached. Nobody ever be able to get into my computer. Nobody will ever be able to de-encrypt my files. Obviously, all of that happens, and the film is about the Justice League basically being taken out one by one. I actually love the plot. I think it's fantastic. It's far better in the graphic novel. The other thing I liked was the 6 of them, not including Cyborg, because there wasn't a Cyborg in the cartoon. All of these voice actors are the kind of royalty. You've got Kevin Conroy as Batman, Tim Daly as Superman, Susan Eisenberg as Wonder Woman. You've got Carl Lumley as Martian Manhunter. They were all from straight out of the cartoons. And then you've got Rosenbaum, who was obviously Lex Luthor in Smallville. And you've got Nathan Fillion as Green Lantern. And for what the script was, they, acted the hell out of it. And I cannot fault any of those people whatsoever. The problem with it, as is the problem with all of these animated films, is that it's barely 3 acts. You get either like a very small act 1 or a very small act 3, but they, at an hour and 16 minutes, you have to ask, what were we expecting? It kind of fails to deliver on the big punch at the end. And when all the Justice League have been taken out in very, ingenious ways, it's like less than 10 minutes film time for all of those problems to be resolved. When Batman decides, okay, I am the problem here. I have to deal with this. And one by one, he just, kind of rescues and helps all of the Justice League. The resolution is quite easy. And you just feel slightly underwhelmed. But what I would say is, for the love of God, everybody, please read the graphic novel because it's so, so good.
I've started doing this thing when I watch stuff for the podcast called Lex Watches Stuff, and I kind of tweet my commentary as we go along, and pretty much right out of the gate, the dialogue in this had me cracking up, and not for good reasons. I mean, it was so bad, and I actually had to resist tweeting every single line because I just could not believe that somebody had actually written these words down seriously, and these actors were also saying them seriously. It was just, I mean, there was like, crap, it's the Justice League, and I mean, like, come on. I appreciate Nathan Fillion, but and I was thinking this as I was watching it. I think the only role he's ever really been good at was when he was in Firefly, and every role since then he's just been Nathan Fillion. This was no exception. As soon as Green Lantern opened his mouth, it was like, oh, it's Nathan Fillion. There was no kind of illusion that he was actually Green Lantern. It was just Nathan Fillion saying stuff. I don't know. Some people probably like that. Personally, I prefer it when actors kind of disappear into their roles. I don't want to sit there and think about like the real person who's acting, especially with a character like Green Lantern, who I don't particularly have any interest in. So to put him in a character that, oh no, Doctor Horrible sing along block, he was good in that too. I wasn't overly impressed with the plot. I mean, it was a very Batman thing to do, but particularly, well, it wasn't necessarily the plot, it was the resolution. The concept is really interesting, and like Cyborg gets to play kind of a pretty relevant role fixing everything. But then at the end, they have this like committee meeting, and they're like, "Oh, the accused can speak for himself," and blah blah blah. And then at the end, Batman says this very sort of tawdry line of, "I do have a contingency plan for stopping me, and it's the Justice League." And it's like, oh come on, like, do we need that?
I wanted to ask you basically about Batman's plan because I think it was wholly justified. I know, obviously, I'm just speaking as like a huge Batman fan, but I think his plan was so justified, and the fact that he didn't tell anyone, it's the most Batman thing ever.
Batman is part of the Justice League, which is made up entirely of superpowered people, and he's basically just rich. And obviously, he's aware of their capabilities. Superman is always getting mind controlled. Like every time Superman does something, he's getting mind controlled. I don't know what the issue there is, but they need to make him like a Magneto helmet so that doesn't happen anymore. So yeah, planning for the eventuality that these superpowered people could go rogue or go bad or be taken over in some way is very logical. And Batman is a very methodical, prepared guy. Probably was a Boy Scout as a kid. So yeah, like, I mean, if I were in Batman's position, I would 100% have backup methods for like stopping Superman and Wonder Woman and Martian Manhunter and all of these other guys. Like, just because you never know what's gonna happen. What if they do go bad? Who can stop Superman really when it comes right down to it? Apparently, Batman can.
Unfortunately, it's a miss, but I would probably save all the plots, and I mean all of the plots of all of the animated films we've watched. This is probably the one I'm most interested in. The problem is it just wasn't really executed in a satisfying way. Well, that's probably the best way to describe this whole experience. It was just unsatisfying. Should we move on to Snowpiercer?
Yes, let us move on to Snowpiercer and the Train Detective.
Yeah, I mean, I've basically decided that I'm going to take this show for what it is, even though the premise is utter lunacy, and the fact that the train is the TARDIS. What did you think of episodes 2 and 3?
So yeah, I was thinking about like my problems with the show, and as you said, it is the TARDIS. I do not believe, like, it is fucking huge, and it does not feel like a train at all, and it's very kind of shiny and bright, and even the tailie doesn't really seem that bad. Whereas when you think about the film, I mean, one, the acting of all the characters in the film is 10 times higher than the TV show characters, but within the film, there was a very definite sense of claustrophobia. It felt like a very small, contained space. I mean, very often characters spanned the entire train car. They would be thrown from one side to the other. It was very confined, very constraining, and they maximized that feeling of small, dark space. It was very dark. It was grungy. It was particularly the tail was barely lit, and everybody was dirty, and there wasn't any sort of optimism about it. We also had a very definite sense of threat as well, that if the outside came in at all, they would die. And saying that in an episode where an entire train car does die because it gets frozen to death, I think that they're not doing something right in the show by with the atmosphere. Like, this feels very much like any other sort of dystopian post-apocalyptic thing where you have a compound of people trying to survive, and it's a little bit authoritarian. And but it reminds me of a lot of other shows, and it doesn't feel unique. It doesn't feel like it's actually on a train. It feels like they have this huge world to play in. The emotional beats that they're trying to convey don't have the weight that they should have. I mean, like the arm shattering moment. All I could think about was the arm shattering moment from the film, and this did not live up to that. Really, what they should do is get as far away from anything that was in the film as possible, because you're just gonna sit there and make comparisons. There were a lot of cliched tropes. I mean, I think the episode where they went to the night car, it felt like they were cramming in every single trope they could think of, from the song in the nightclub with the weird montage and the like super on the nose lyrics, to the drug dealers and the guy prostituting himself for medicine for his mother. And like, come on, you're stretching credulity.
When you were talking about the train, I think you're absolutely right, because in the film, much like a kind of a bunker to get through an apocalypse, it was a means by which to survive the apocalypse, not something in which you would necessarily thrive. This train doesn't feel like that. It feels like a place where you could actually kind of thrive. The night car was triple the height of the other cars, 5 times the width. There are these moments where you are just taken out of this TV show while you're trying to wrap your head around what you're actually being presented with. There was another moment where they went to interrogate someone, and he was having this kind of noodle dish, and it honestly felt like they were walking through a street in Chinatown or something. It's beyond belief that this could be happening within a carriage on a train. Most of the time, that's how I feel.
And speaking of tropes, I really, really hate tropes and cliched scenes. So obviously, between the straight people, there are two things I have a problem with. One, just in the middle of everything, we have this sort of dreamy something supposed to be sexy sex scene between Andre and his ex-wife, when up until now they've just been hostile, but oh, he remembers when he proposed to her, so they're still in love. And all of a sudden their relationship has completely changed, and it's like, I still love you, but I know that the train needs you. And which is kind of bullshit, because he's got a new girlfriend back in the tail, and his whole focus is, I have to get back to her, I have to get back to her, but he fucks this other woman, and that's okay. If everybody on the train has open relationships, fine, but you need to establish that. Then you get to the lesbian couple, and this happens all the time with like gay romance on television. They kiss and immediately cuts to the end of it. So like, we saw 5 minutes of Andre and Zara having sex, and like nothing of the lesbians having sex. Like, what the fuck? Not that like we needed to see the lesbians having sex, but it was in a single episode, and it just very clearly demonstrated the priority of heterosexual relationships over homosexual ones, and just a very glaring difference in the treatment of them.
My main problems are the fact that there will never be enough kind of criminal activity on this train to justify a train detective.
They said it 7 times in one episode. 4 times was in the same scene. I'm the train detective. He's the train detective. Ooh, you need to listen to the train detective. I was like, God, come on, it's not that great of a title.
That would be like a better title for this TV show. Andre Layton, train detective, and just like divorce itself completely from Snowpiercer, because it just feels like the priorities of the show are in an entirely different place right now. We occasionally get things like, talking about tectonic, or talking about seismic activity, talking about avalanches, talking about they're rationing resources now up and down the train. But I'm more interested in the fate of humanity than these kind of fairly piddling things that are happening on the train. Fair enough, there are cannibals on the train. That's not necessarily the smallest thing, but how would you
Um,
fix this show?
I would cancel it. I keep going back to the film because like the film captured these concepts really really well, and I mean it's really no wonder why, because he's an amazing director, he's an amazing storyteller. But like when Jennifer Connelly's character kept pushing them to go faster, even though the engineers were saying this is dangerous, I didn't buy that she would be willing to risk all of humanity's life just to go a particular speed. I also felt like every time they took somebody from the tail, they were really sort of nice about it. It's like, oh, we're gonna take your children, but you have an hour to decide if you're going to do this and pack up your belongings and come along. And I was like, but wouldn't they just like? I mean, they view these people as less than human. Wouldn't they just take what they wanted to take? So that those are my thoughts.
Yeah, this will be the last episode of Andre Layton, Trained Detective, that we review on the podcast. Let's talk about the first episode of Tales from the Loop. I think it came out in April, but it was something that wasn't really on my radar until you showed it to me.
Apparently, Tales from the Loop is actually based on a book of photographs from Simon Slinhog. His art is very evocative. It's very interesting. I spent quite a lot of time browsing through it because the episode was very slow. And yeah, it's definitely the kind of art that I would be excited about. But I feel like, and yeah, I would probably look at it and say, hey, I could come up with a story based on this stuff. But there is no real story here. It reminded me in places of Dark, except Dark did it much better and much more interestingly. The cinematography is great, but pretty pictures do not a story make.
For a pilot, I found it surprisingly soulless. I don't know about you. Tonally, I found it quite bleak. And genuinely, it made me feel quite sad, actually. They focused on these very few characters, and we didn't really get any backstory to any of them, except the two were the same person. But it really didn't even attempt to do any world building, and I just felt it was trying to sell us on the mystery rather than anything else. And I wasn't particularly sold on the mystery because, like you say, there are other. In many ways, this felt like it was trying to be a kind of Scandinavian dark sci-fi show, and like you say, other shows kind of do it better. I just felt very sad, and I just thought it was very soulless, and I have no more idea about what the show is now than I did at the beginning, and I've no better idea about who these people are or what this world is than I did at the beginning. And so I just think as a pilot, it ultimately failed in almost every way. Nothing really stood out to me, and nothing's drawing me back for more.
I think one of the main issues for me at least was that in this first episode we followed two 10-year-old kids. Having child protagonists in something that's geared to adults is tricky. Adults writing child protagonists for anybody is tricky. There's a very fine line between making them believable and making them sound too old and making them sound too young. So that in itself, even writing for children, it takes a lot of talent. It takes a lot of nuance. You have to really know what you're doing. It's not an easy thing to do, and that's just writing children for children. When you make it writing children for adults, you add another layer to it because most adults interact with children and will sit there and say children don't sound like that. Plus you've also got to make it interesting for the adults because like I said, most adults interact with children, and when they watch TV they don't necessarily want to listen to more children. They're kind of probably watching when the kids are safely in bed and they've had enough of kids for the day. But you can't have like a purely child logic because an adult is going to be sitting there say that's stupid, or why are these children just allowed to run around unsupervised? Like at the bar when Loretta comes in, her son was standing outside the window and she just left him there and lost both of them. She didn't like drag him inside with her. Anyway, Although we have established she's not a very good mother. But particularly in this first episode, I found the children very inconsistent. In one moment they would sound very adult, very like their speech, the words they used. Like Cole asks at one point, "What sort of material is this made from?" Like he's fucking 10. He's not gonna say what sort of material is this made from. He's gonna say what is it? But then they would also seem younger than they should be at the same time, and a lot of their conversations seemed like older people, maybe even like teenagers at the youngest, the sort of things they would be talking about, the sort of arguments they would be having with each other. And so like I kept going in and out of whether or not these characters were actually real. And yes, it's fiction, but the characters need to seem real. And as you said, the world building was like they didn't even try for their like what are these robots for? They just look creepy and menacing out in the thing. It's sort of an indeterminate time period, an indeterminate location, which I don't have a problem with. That's kind of cool. I enjoy it when they mess with time periods, but they should have put some more effort into the world building and given us a little bit more hint of what the loop actually is. And I think I mentioned in one of my tweets that I felt as I was watching it very misled by all of the descriptions of this show, and even the opening sequence where the grandfather kind of reiterates the description of like, "Ooh, this is kind of a trippy, weird, universe-bending television show," and it's not.
I think when I watched the trailer, I was expecting something quite hopeful, something about kind of theoretical physics, trippy, kind of like he said in the opening. Again, it felt like kind of dispatches from elsewhere. It might be the current vogue to kind of look directly
Yes,
down the
yes.
camera.
I was comparing it to Dispatches like through the whole episode.
Yeah, I'm not really entirely sure what I was expecting, but probably something a lot more hopeful. And the fact that it was called Tales from the Loop, I actually wondered if it might be something kind of like Amazing Stories or the Twilight Zone, but in a more maybe hopeful technological take than something like Black Mirror. And so when it started and it was just incredibly bleak, we've got a pair of inattentive mothers. The grandfather was kind of a bit dismissive. It was obviously outside. It was wind. Well, it was a lot of snow. It was presumably winter. The kids were just sad and neglected, and the show kept going. And I was like, okay, when's the kind of the pick me up? When's this story going to kind of evolve and be heartwarming or something? And it never really came. I mean, was there anything you liked about this? Because I honestly I couldn't give you something that I liked other than it looked really great. Aesthetically it was pleasing.
That's basically all I enjoyed about it. It was very aesthetically pleasing, although at a certain point I got a little fed up with the visual aesthetic. And mostly because that's the only thing of substance there was. So they didn't really give me anything else to latch onto, and after about 30 minutes I was tired of looking at a lot of the same shots. So it wasn't even like I mentioned, we got a lot of the robots. They kept focusing on this wind chime thing, which whatever. The house kind of evaporating and the snow falling upwards was kind of interesting, but again I felt they overplayed that. It really seemed like they hadn't thought out the story and they were just like, oh, we need to have some really cool pictures. Like I really love the artist's work. I will probably investigate that more, but the show was not a good representation of the atmosphere and the narratives that he's telling in his artwork.
I think as a pilot, I would say that this is probably quite misjudged. I think they felt that they can sell people on the mystery, but the mystery wasn't enough for me. You probably need some more world building, maybe a kind of bigger understanding of what the loop is, or just something about that. And yeah, some characters that are kind of engaging, because these were not. All in all, this just does not stack up well against better TV shows that are out at the moment that are doing everything that this show is trying to do far better. Okay, well, I think that's all we've got time for this week. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks again to Carla, our new patron. You can find us on all the social media. And don't forget, we are doing a competition. You can find that on our Twitter feed for a chance to win a Funko. Subscribe to our YouTube channel.
All right, see ya.
See ya.